Jewish Zionism began with the hope that all Jewish people would have a safe and peaceful dwelling place, but it has become an ideology of superiority which has corrupted, perhaps even replaced, the faith of Judaism. In 1948, American Mark Braverman was born into a devoutly religious and Zionist home, but the scales fell from his eyes when he experienced life in the West Bank. In his book, Fatal Embrace, he speaks as a Jewish prophet and also explains Walter Brueggemann's analysis of the land as a metaphor. Mark wrote, "On the 9th of Av, when I stood on the outskirts of Jerusalem, a Jerusalem I now saw marching to its own destruction, I felt like the prophet Jeremiah and like Jesus 8 centuries later, overcome with grief. Jeremiah mourned for the brokenness and imminent disaster awaiting the people. But the mourning was not about victimhood. It is about the self-inflicted nature of disaster to come. For Brueggemann, the land is a core metaphor for the drama of God's people struggling to come to terms with the divine imperative to live justly. It is at once the promise and the problem. Possession of the land is totally conditional on obedience to God's plan as expressed in the covenant. The land, a powerful force for well-being characterized by social coherence, security, and freedom, the land is a vast metaphor about home, homelessness, loss, transgressions, forgiveness, and redemption. God's promise of land to Israel is at the heart of the covenant. Christians cannot speak seriously to Jews unless we acknowledge land to be the central agenda. It is the locus of meaning and the issue of identity. There's an entitlement that also must be acknowledged. What would the prophets say? Mark asked. Rabbi Lerner once wrote, "From Moses to Jeremiah and Isaiah, the prophets taught that the Jewish claim on the land of Israel was totally contingent on the moral and spiritual life of the Jews who lived there, and that the land would, as the Torah tells us, vomit you out if people did not live according to the highest moral vision of Torah." Over and over again, the Torah repeated its most frequently stated command: when you enter the land, do not oppress the stranger, the other, the one who is an outsider of your society, the powerless one. And then not only you shall love your neighbor as yourself, but also you shall love the other. I had two experiences on the 9th of Av on July 16, 2007. That morning I attended the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions summer kickoff to rebuild 300 out of over 18,000 Palestinian dwellings the Israeli government has destroyed, which has created far more than 18,000 homeless families there. For many were apartment buildings, and Palestinians share their homes with their extended families. An American Israeli, Aviva Joseph, wrapped the event up when she said, "We are here today building on the 9th of Av, the day the Jewish temple was destroyed. I was born into an Orthodox Zionist home. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors. When I was 10, I used to go to Bethlehem. But after the first Intifada, things began closing down. Physical walls, psychological walls. I lived in Gilo, some call it a settlement, some a neighborhood, and I lived in a small box with my own myth. Now I live in California, and things you see from there you can't see here, and other things you must come here to see, what cannot be seen anywhere else. I love Israel, but until I began listening to the voices of the marginalized did I see I was living my own myth. The work is just not in the head, it's in the heart, opening both sides to a new paradigm with compassion." That afternoon, as I headed back to my room, that community of Israelis, Palestinians, and internationals who were all together building and sweating were in my heart, but I was thinking about jumping in the pool at my hotel as I made my way down Nablus Road. In front of me, I noticed an old man, hunched over his shoulders, walking very slowly and muttering to himself. But it was not until I passed him by and I recognized the voice that called out to me, "Hi, remember me?" that I realized it was Mordecai Vanunu. We had crossed paths right in front of St. Stephen's Dominican Church on Nablus Road. Vanunu smiled when he said, "This is the spot where they stoned to death the first Christian martyr for freedom of speech." St. Stephen was indeed the very first Christian to be stoned to death for speaking truth to power. I began a series of interviews with the whistleblower of Israel's weapons of mass destruction program in 2005. And I once wrote an op-ed and called Vanunu a prophet. When he read that piece, he emailed me and in bold letters wrote, "Don't call me that." But in the spirit of freedom of speech, I cannot help myself. Prophets do not necessarily predict the future as much as they point out impending doom. Vanunu pointed the way to the weapons of mass destruction program underground in the Negev, and they have yet to receive an international inspection. Vanunu has been under house arrest since he emerged from 18 years in a tomb-sized cell for telling the world Israel had gone nuclear. He has been forbidden by the state to speak to foreigners and has denied the right to leave the state where his life is in danger from fundamentalists who consider him a traitor for telling the truth. The Hebrew prophet Jeremiah also spent much of his life under house arrest in Jerusalem for being a truth teller. We know more about the personal life and struggles of Jeremiah than any other Hebrew prophet. Jeremiah translates to "as the Lord throws," as in hurling. He had few friends and is considered a prophet of doom. Jeremiah began prophesying during the time of great stress and storm when the entire nation, Judah itself, was being sealed. Jeremiah was labeled a traitor by many for speaking truth to power and to the people. He said, "I cannot keep silent. Disaster follows disaster. The land lies in ruins. My people are fools. They do not know me." Christians are called to be peacemakers, to forgive and love their enemies, and to try to reconcile with all people. And the cross is also a metaphor. 2,000 years ago, the cross had no religious symbolic meaning, and it was not a piece of jewelry. When Jesus said, "Pick up your cross and follow me," everyone back then understood he was issuing a political statement, for the main roads into Jerusalem were lined with crucified agitators, rebels, dissidents, any who disturbed the status quo of the Roman Empire and military occupying forces. Christians could indeed change the world if they would pick up that cross. Learn much more at wearewideawake.org, February 18, 2010, The Brutal Truth About With God on Our Side and the 9th of Av. Power to the peaceful. Only in solidarity do we have it in our power to begin the world again.